so tired of just being told I'm pretty.
The 1955 movie Picnic with William Holden co-starred a young Kim Novak, who went on to an even bigger role in a classic Hitchcock film just a few years later.
There is a moment in a 1955 film called Picnic that people still describe decades later, and they almost never describe it correctly. They remember it as a dance. It isn't, really. It's a woman walking down a set of wooden steps toward a man across a stretch of grass at a Labor Day gathering in small-town Kansas, moving to a slow arrangement of a song called Moonglow, clapping softly, not quite in time, her eyes never leaving him. The camera doesn't do anything clever. It doesn't need to. She's 22 years old. She has been making films for barely a year, and every person watching understands instantly that they are looking at a movie star. Her name was Kim Novak, and within 12 months of that scene, she was the most popular film star in the world. Not a rising talent or a promising newcomer. The #1 draw at the American box office. Columbia Pictures, the studio that manufactured her, could scarcely keep up with the demand. She had made her first credited appearance in August of 1954 in a black-and-white crime picture called Pushover, third billed beneath Fred MacMurray. 2 years later, exhibitors across the country were ranking her above every other actress alive. On the 29th of July, 1957, she was on the cover of Time magazine, and the article inside was titled, with no particular subtlety, "A Star is Made." That phrase is worth holding on to, because it's more honest than Time probably intended. She was made, assembled. A studio chief named Harry Cohn had decided he needed a weapon, and she was it. And then, at the peak, at the moment when the machine was running perfectly and the money was pouring in, and Alfred Hitchcock had already put her at the center of what would eventually be called the greatest film ever made, she left. Not gradually. Not after a slow decline into smaller parts and television guest spots. She loaded her belongings into a van, put her dogs in the car, and drove north out of Los Angeles, and she did not come back. Today, Kim Novak is 93 years old. She lives on a ranch in southern Oregon, hundreds of miles from Hollywood, and she has lived there for most of the past 5 decades. What she does with her days now would have been unimaginable to the executives who once dictated the color of her hair. But we're going to get there slowly, because the woman who left Hollywood in 1966 is not the woman who arrived there in 1954, and the distance between them is the entire story. Built in Chicago, assembled in Hollywood. She was born Marilyn Pauline Novak in Chicago on the 13th of February, 1933, the absolute bottom of the Great Depression, in a Czech-American family on the city's west side. Her father worked for the railroad. Money was tight in the way that money was tight for everyone in Chicago in 1933. She has said, publicly, and more than once, that hers was not an easy household. Speaking to an audience at the TCM Classic Film Festival in 2012, she described a father who suffered from depression and a home in which conflict was constant. And she added something revealing, that growing up that way made conflict on a film set feel entirely normal to her. She'd been trained for it. What she wanted as a girl had nothing to do with movies. She wanted to paint. She was good enough at it that she won 2 scholarships connected to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, a genuine distinction and not a participation prize. She went on to Wright Junior College and studied art. That was the plan. That was always the plan. The detour came in 1953, and it is one of the strangest origin stories in Hollywood history. A refrigerator company hired her to travel the country as a promotional model at trade shows. She was crowned Miss Deep Freeze. She stood beside appliances and smiled, and the tour worked its way west, and eventually it reached Los Angeles. While she was there, she and 2 other models stood in line to be extras in an RKO picture called The French Line, a Jane Russell vehicle. Standing in that line, not performing, not auditioning, just standing there, she was spotted by an agent. What happened next was less a discovery than a construction project. At Columbia Pictures, Harry Cohn had spent 1953 in a rage at Rita Hayworth, his greatest star, who had walked out on him. According to the account Time published in 1957, Cohn announced to his underlings that if he didn't have another major female star, he would simply build one. So they built her. Her teeth were straightened and whitened. She was put on a strict diet, sent to a gym, sent to acting classes. Her brown hair was dyed to a shade of platinum, so specific it became a trademark. She was photographed on a tiger skin rug for the fan magazines before she had appeared in a single film, and editors demanded interviews with a woman whose work no one had seen. And they came for her name. Cohn wanted to call her Kit Marlowe. He said, in a line that has followed him ever since, that nobody would buy a ticket to see a girl with a Polish surname. She told him she was Czech, and that either way, it was her name, and she was keeping it. Marilyn had to go, because there was already a famous blonde Marilyn. For 2 days, the studio called her Kit Novak. She went to the publicity department in tears and pleaded for something else, and eventually the great man was charmed into a compromise. Kim Novak. Half theirs, half hers. It was the first fight she won, and it set the pattern for everything after. Pushover opened in August 1954, a taut little noir directed by Richard Quine. Followed the same year, opposite Jack Lemmon. Both did respectable business. Both earned her good notices. Then came 1955, and the year that made her permanent. In Otto Preminger's The Man with the Golden Arm, she played Molly, the woman standing beside Frank Sinatra's heroin-addicted card dealer, in a film so controversial it was released without the production code seal of approval. And in Joshua Logan's Picnic, opposite William Holden, she played Madge Owens, the small-town beauty exhausted by being looked at. Logan decided the character should be a redhead, so Novak wore a wig. The film was an enormous critical and commercial success, and she won a Golden Globe as the most promising newcomer of the year. By early 1956, she was famous enough to appear as the mystery guest on What's My Line? On the 5th of February, blindfolded panelists sat guessing at her identity while Picnic opened at Radio City Music Hall. That same year, the exhibitors' poll put her at number 1. Consider what that actually meant. Marilyn Monroe was working, Elizabeth Taylor was working, Grace Kelly, Audrey Hepburn, Doris Day, all of them working. And a woman who had been demonstrating refrigerators 3 years earlier was outdrawing every one of them. She followed it with The Eddie Duchin Story in 1956, then Gene Eagles and Pal Joey in 1957, the latter putting her on screen with Sinatra again, and in a piece of casting so pointed it barely qualifies as subtext, with Rita Hayworth, the star she had been hired to replace. Then the Time cover, then Hitchcock. A small detour into the present. Before we go on, one small thing about the present. It isn't the whole picture, and we'll get to that, but it changes how you hear the rest. Kim Novak has a website, not a fan page, her own. It isn't devoted to Vertigo, or to Picnic, or to the years when she was the biggest star in the world. It's devoted to her paintings, which she sells as limited edition prints, and which she has been making continuously for longer than her film career lasted, vastly longer. The Butler Institute of American Art in Youngstown, Ohio, holds a collection of her work, not on loan for a season, in its permanent collection. Canvases with titles like Once Upon a Time, In the Looking Glass, My Symphony of Emotions, and A Wave of Memories, A Hand Full of Feelings. The girl who won 2 art scholarships in Chicago never actually gave that up. She simply got interrupted for about 12 years by becoming one of the most photographed women on Earth. Hold that thought, because in 1957 the interruption was about to reach its highest point. Vertigo and the First Shadows. Alfred Hitchcock had a problem. He was preparing a film based on a French novel about a man hired to follow another man's wife, and about obsession, and about the impossibility of resurrecting the dead. His intended leading lady, Vera Miles, had become pregnant and withdrawn. Hitchcock went to Harry Cohn and asked for Novak without requesting a screen test. Cohn disliked the script, but respected the director enough to let her read it. She read it and said yes before she had ever met Hitchcock. Vertigo was released in 1958, and it asked her to do something almost no film had asked of an actress before, to play a woman playing a woman, and then to play the collapse of that performance. Madeline Elster, cool and remote, and moving through San Francisco like something already half gone, and Judy Barton, the shop girl underneath, ordinary and hopeful and destroyed by a man who cannot love her unless she becomes someone else. There is an irony here so heavy it's almost embarrassing to point out. Columbia had taken a brunette art student from Chicago, bleached her hair, changed her name, dressed her, and sold the result to the public as a fantasy. Hitchcock then cast her in a film about a man who takes a brunette shop girl, bleaches her hair, changes her name, dresses her, and destroys her in the process. She has said she understood that character completely. She fought over the costumes. She fought over the gray suit. She has spoken in the years since about being made to wear things that felt like a cage, and about eventually deciding that the discomfort was useful, because the character was in a cage too. The film was not a triumph in 1958. Reviews were mixed. Business was fine, not spectacular. Hitchcock himself moved on and made North by Northwest. She made Bell, Book and Candle the same year, again with James Stewart, playing a Manhattan witch with a Siamese cat. And it was charming and successful, and nobody thought it would matter less than Vertigo someday. And behind all of it, off-screen, the machine was beginning to grind against her. In 1956, she had appeared as a guest on The Steve Allen Show, and so had Sammy Davis Jr. They met. Over the following year, quietly, they fell into a relationship. A white movie star at the peak of her fame and a black entertainer at the peak of his in America in 1957. The studio's reaction was not subtle. The pressure applied to both of them has been documented for decades. In January 1958, Davis abruptly married a dancer named Lorraine White, and that marriage lasted a matter of months. Novak has spoken about this openly in recent years, and her framing matters. She has said she doesn't regard the relationship as scandalous at all. She has described Davis as someone she genuinely cared for, and she has said the thing they truly shared was the exhausting experience of being wanted for how they looked rather than for what they could do. She has also said that her first childhood sweetheart was a Mexican altar boy at her church, and that she simply never thought about race the way the studio expected her to, that she resisted because she didn't believe the studio was right. Meanwhile, the press was turning. That Time cover story in 1957 spent its final pages describing her as difficult, recording a co-star's tart remark about the difference between temperament and bad manners, cataloging broken appointments, a walked-out interview, a set kept waiting. There is another reading of that behavior, and it comes from Novak herself. Decades later, she disclosed publicly that she has bipolar disorder, a diagnosis she did not receive until long after her film career had ended. In her own written statement for the Butler Institute, she describes a mind that could be flown high above the clouds and dropped to its knees within a nanosecond. In the 1950s, nobody was looking for that. Nobody was treating it. She was a 24-year-old woman, undiagnosed, working 16-hour days inside an institution designed to extract as much as possible from her before she wore out. And when she buckled, the trade papers called her temperamental. She kept working. Strangers When We Meet in 1960 with Kirk Douglas, The Notorious Landlady in 1962 with Jack Lemmon and Fred Astaire, Boys' Night Out the same year. In 1964, she took on Of Human Bondage, and then Billy Wilder's Kiss Me Stupid, a comedy so risque for its moment that it drew condemnation from the Legion of Decency and damaged nearly everyone attached to it. In 1965 came The Amorous Adventures of Moll Flanders, and a marriage to the English actor Richard Johnson. That marriage lasted 13 months. She was 32 years old. She had been the biggest star in the world less than a decade earlier, and by her own account, something fundamental had gone missing: the exit. The turning point does not arrive as a scandal or a firing or a flop. It arrives as a house. Her longtime manager and confidant Sue Cameron told the story publicly at the Venice Film Festival in 2025, and it has the ring of something that had been waiting a long time to be said out loud. In the early 60s, Novak and her sister were driving near Carmel, on the California coast not far from Big Sur, and they came across a property, glass and stone, perched above the sea. Novak bought it that same day, in the middle of a shoot. She named it Gull House. By Cameron's account, she wasn't buying a weekend retreat. She was buying an exit. She wanted somewhere to go whenever Hollywood became unbearable, and in the back of her mind, the escape was already being planned. Then, in 1966, the hillside beneath her Bel Air home gave way in a mudslide, and the house was lost. Novak has always believed in signs, Cameron said, and she read this one immediately. Her house was going, so she was going. She put what remained in a van, took the dogs, got in the car, and drove. She was 33 years old. She was, by any commercial measure, still a viable leading lady, and she effectively stopped. Here is where a certain kind of documentary would reach for the violin, the tragic exile, the career cut short, the woman broken by Hollywood. But Kim Novak has spent 60 years declining to tell it that way, and it would be dishonest to overrule her. Speaking to people in 2021, she put it about as plainly as it can be put. She said she had to leave to survive. She has said she lost her sense of who she truly was and what she stood for. That in Hollywood she was fighting constantly just to hold on to her own identity. That is not the language of someone who was rejected. That's the language of someone who calculated the cost of staying and decided it was too high. Another piece of the present before we go further, and this one is harder. In July of 2000, a fire tore through her Oregon home. The animals survived, her family survived, but a great deal did not. Art supplies, belongings, and paintings, many of them her own. Work from years of her life gone in an afternoon. There was something else in that fire, too. She had tried once, quietly, to write a book about her life. The manuscript burned with everything else. She has said so herself, without much drama, as a simple statement of what happened. She tried it once and lost it in the fire. Think about what that means for a moment. She walked away from Hollywood to become a painter. 20 years into that new life, a fire took the paintings, and she started again. The life she chose instead. The years after 1966 are the part of her life that the public simply never saw, which is precisely why they're worth telling. She lived first on the California coast at Gull House painting. In October of 1974, a large animal veterinarian named Robert Malloy came to treat one of her horses, an Arabian. They married in March of 1976. He was not a producer or an actor or a studio man. He was an equine vet from Nebraska who spent his working life with his hands inside animals in barns and fields, and by every available account he had no interest whatsoever in the film business. They stayed married for 44 years. Eventually they moved north to Oregon, first to a log home along the Williamson River near Kiloquin, later to a ranch of some 240 acres in the Rogue Valley of southern Oregon near Eagle Point. Country of oaks and pasture and low mountains, the kind of place where the nearest thing to a red carpet is a gravel drive. They kept horses, they kept llamas, they took in rescue dogs, they canoed, she rode, she assisted him in his veterinary work, and she painted constantly, not as a hobby to fill the hours, but as the actual center of the life, the thing she had gone there to do. Hollywood, to its credit, kept asking, and she said yes occasionally. She appeared in The Mirror Cracked in 1980 in an ensemble of legends. She spent a season on the primetime soap Falcon Crest in 1986 and 1987, playing a character named Kit Marlowe. And yes, that is the name Harry Cohn had tried to force on her in 1954. She finally used it, on her own terms, 30 years later, and gave it back. In 1991, she made a film called Liebestrom for the director Mike Figgis. The experience was difficult. It was her last. And then, slowly, something began happening that she had not engineered and could not have predicted. The world started coming to her. In 1997, the Berlin International Film Festival gave her an honorary Golden Bear. Retrospectives began appearing, and Vertigo, the film that had been received politely and then largely set aside in 1958, kept climbing. Every decade, the British Film Institute's Sight and Sound magazine polls critics worldwide on the greatest films ever made, and for 50 years, the answer had been Citizen Kane. In 2012, Vertigo took the top spot. The film she had made at 25, about a woman remade into someone else's fantasy, was now officially the greatest film in the history of the medium. In May of 2013, she came to Cannes to introduce the restored version. She was received magnificently. Her husband was beside her on the steps, which is exactly why what happened the following year hit her so hard, the night the internet came for her. On the 2nd of March 2014, Kim Novak walked onto the stage of the Academy Awards alongside Matthew McConaughey to present the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. She was 81 years old, and she had not appeared on that stage in a very long time. Within minutes, the internet did what the internet does. Jokes about her face, jokes about her voice, cruelty at industrial scale, from strangers, from public figures, from people who had never met her, all of it aimed at how an 81-year-old woman looked under television lights. She went silent for weeks. She has since said she didn't leave her house for days, that it hit her the way it hits children and teenagers, which is exactly the right comparison, and exactly the one no one else was making. Then, in April, she wrote an open letter and put it out publicly, and it remains one of the more remarkable documents any Hollywood star has produced about their own life. She didn't hide behind denial. She said she'd had fat injections in her face, and that they seemed less invasive than surgery, and that in her opinion, a person has a right to look as good as they can. She explained that her halting speech that night came from a pill she'd taken to calm her nerves, combined with a 3-day fast. She was disturbed, she said, that another older woman, Liza Minnelli, sitting in the audience, had been made the punchline of a joke from the stage. And then she wrote the sentence that turned the whole thing around. She said she would no longer hold herself back from speaking out against bullies, and she added, "We can't let people get away with affecting our lives." But it's what came before that line, in the same letter, that stops you cold. She wrote that years earlier she had walked away from Hollywood partly because she hadn't stood up to the bullies, that she'd given in to the pressure instead of fighting for what she believed was right. 50 years later, from a ranch in Oregon, an 81-year-old woman finally took the fight. She also mentioned, almost in passing, why painting mattered so much, that it let her work her frustrations out in a way that didn't hurt anything or anybody. That same month, she appeared at the TCM Classic Film Festival, the commitment that had changed her mind about staying silent, and she brought a painting with her, a Vertigo painting, because of course she did. So, how does Kim Novak actually live now? She lives in southern Oregon, on the ranch, in the Rogue Valley, in the house she and Bob Malloy built a life inside. She has been in that part of the world for decades. Robert Malloy died at home on the 27th of November, 2020. He was 80. They had been together 46 years, married for 44. She announced it herself on Facebook, in her own words, a short message about a soulmate passing on to greener pastures and about having to learn to be satisfied with the memories. She was 87 years old, and she did what she has done since she was a girl in Chicago. She painted. When a journalist visited her Oregon studio in February 2021, 2 days after her 88th birthday, he found her apologizing for the mess, canvases in progress behind her, a rescue dog named Patches half asleep on the sofa, her late husband's poodle pointer wandering in and out. She had painted a portrait of Bob. She has said that painting him felt like a way of still talking to him, and that it made her feel less alone. She is not and has never been a recluse in the sad sense of the word, and it's important to be precise about this. She is private, which is a different thing entirely. She has given interviews. She has campaigned openly about mental health and about bullying. She has spoken publicly about surviving breast cancer, diagnosed in 2010, and about a serious riding accident years before that. She talks about her bipolar diagnosis without euphemism and without shame. In her own written artist statement, she refers simply to her bipolar self and describes the highs and the lows as the raw material of the work. In 2018, in her mid-80s, she watched the Me Too movement unfold from her ranch and found herself compelled to respond the only way she knows how. She had broken her left wrist, her painting hand, so she painted it with her right. She called the result a time of reckoning, a face looming over a woman, swirling and violent with color. Speaking to the Associated Press from her property, she said the same things had gone on in her era and that she had never told those stories, but that her painting has all of it. That is not a woman in hiding, that is a woman who chose a different medium. In 2020, she published Kim Novak, Her Art and Life, Reflections and Reproductions of Her Work, released through the Butler Institute. She has said she was asked for a Hollywood tell-all many times and always declined. This was the book she actually wanted. And then came the last thing anyone expected. In June of 2025, the Venice International Film Festival announced that its Golden Lion for Lifetime Achievement would go to Kim Novak. In its announcement, the festival described her as an emancipated star, a rebel at the heart of Hollywood who lit up moviegoers' dreams before retiring to an Oregon ranch to dedicate herself to painting and to her horses. She accepted, and she came. On the 1st of September, 2025, at 92 years old, Kim Novak walked onto a stage at the Venice Lido and was met with a long, warm, unwilling-to-stop ovation. Guillermo del Toro delivered the tribute. It was her first major public appearance of that scale in decades. The festival also premiered a documentary made in direct collaboration with her, Kim Novak's Vertigo, directed by Alexandre O. Philippe, in which she speaks at length about her life, her leaving, and her art. She has said she agreed to it because it felt like a chance to gather her life up and set the things that mattered on the record. Days later, on the 6th of September, she appeared at the Deauville Festival in France, and then she went home to Oregon. The biography that accompanied her Golden Lion describes what her days consist of now, and it is the least Hollywood list imaginable. Painting, writing poetry, riding her favorite horse, a horse named Poet, and making a home with 3 rescue dogs. Her paintings have been shown at the San Francisco Historical Society and at the National Museum in Prague. From July to November of 2025, the Butler Institute mounted a tribute exhibition of her work from its permanent collection, timed to the Venice Award, with canvases titled Twilight Flight, They Won't Let Me Go Yet, and We Will Get Through This Together. And in March of 2026, at 93, she gave an interview to the Times of London that made headlines around the world. A film is in development about her relationship with Sammy Davis Jr., with Sydney Sweeney cast to play her, and Kim Novak had opinions. She said she would never have approved the casting. She said Sweeney was wrong for the part. Her deeper objection was the one she has been making since 1954, that the film will reduce a relationship built on genuine common ground to something purely sexual, that they will make her a body again. 60 years out of the business, 93 years old, in a farmhouse in Oregon, and she is still fighting Harry Cohn's argument. She's still winning it too. What remains? So let's go back to where we started. A 22-year-old woman coming down a set of wooden steps in a Kansas twilight in 1955, moving toward William Holden while a clarinet plays Moonglow, and an entire country deciding at once that it loves her. The #1 box office star on Earth, the Time cover, the green light on the San Francisco fog in Vertigo, and the gray suit, and the woman remade into someone else's dream. That woman was real. She existed. Millions of people fell for her, and they were not wrong to. But she was also, in a very literal sense, a product, built by a studio out of a Czech-American girl from Chicago who had wanted to be a painter and who kept her own surname only by walking into the most feared office in Hollywood and refusing to leave without it. Everything after that was her trying to get the rest of herself back. She got the name. Then, in 1966, she got the life, driving north with her dogs while the town that made her was still holding the door open. She got the coast, and then the ranch, and Bob Malloy, and 44 years of horses and llamas and rivers and rescued animals, and a man who cared nothing at all about the box office. She lost a house to a mudslide and a lifetime of paintings to a fire, and she rebuilt after both. She was mocked on the biggest stage in her industry at 81, and answered by writing something braver than anything anyone said about her. And along the way, without asking for it, she was vindicated in the most extravagant fashion imaginable. The film that shrugged past her in 1958 became the greatest ever made. The festival at Venice put a golden lion in her hands. A room full of the most sophisticated audience in world cinema stood up for a 92-year-old woman who had walked out on Hollywood before most of them were born. She has said that with her, it worked in reverse, that where so many people and films get less appreciated with time, hers grew more respected. And she has said that her own life has grown richer the longer she's been around. That is not the arc of someone who disappeared. Here's the thing about the question this whole story is built on. Whatever happened to Kim Novak? There is a hidden assumption buried inside it. It assumes that leaving is the same as vanishing, that if we stopped watching, the story stopped. It didn't. It just moved out of frame. For 60 years, while we were remembering a blonde in a gray suit on a San Francisco street, a woman in Southern Oregon was getting up in the morning, feeding animals, and painting the inside of her own head onto canvas after canvas. Grief, joy, rage, a dog's face, a wave of memories, her husband's profile in a rainbow of color. There are hundreds of them, and there will be more. The rest of us got the fantasy. She kept the life. So take that deep breath. Not because something terrible happened to Kim Novak, but because it didn't. Because a woman the whole world once claimed to own looked at everything she'd been handed, and quietly, deliberately, at the height of it, decided she'd rather have something else. She is 93 years old. She lives on a ranch in Oregon with 3 dogs and a horse named Poet. And she's still painting.